Hello students, welcome to the Analyst dated 4th of October 2023. Today we look at 5 important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. The first article will be regarding the criminalization of politics. Then we look at the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967 and why do we need it. Then we look at the Nobel Prize in Physics. And finally we look at a case study in Bid, Maharashtra, that is from the Marathwada region. And lastly, we look at the Purchasing Managers Index. Now, let's start with the first article. The first article pertains to your GS2, that is the Indian Parliament, and we are looking at the criminalization of politics. And before we go ahead, we must look at what does it mean when we use the phrase criminalization of politics. We are simply referring to more and more inclusion of criminals in our politics. That means over the period of time, the number of MPs, MLAs who have a criminal background or who have been convicted or who have pending charges, pending cases against them. So over the period of time, their inclusion in the political system has increased, and this is referred to as criminalization of politics. Now, there is another term which is interchangeably used, and that is politicization of criminals. Now, what do we mean by politicization of criminals? So, this simply means that, let's say, a politician who is MP or MLA, he or she is somehow giving shelter or somehow aiding and abetting criminals. So, group of criminals, they are being supported by a politician. So, that is called the politicization of criminals. And as a politician, as a member of parliament, if you start shielding the criminals, then what happens? Usually, they are not convicted. Usually, their charge sheets are delayed. So, in total, they work together. Both these processes, they work in tandem, and that is why they are interchangeably used. Now, let's look at the issues. So, some data that we can use in such a case is the data that comes from ADR, Association for Democratic Reforms. So, it says that in 2004, 24% of parliamentarians had pending criminal cases. Now, this also points to another pertinent issue, that is pendency of cases against MPs and MLAs or our parliamentarians. Then this number increased over the period of time to 43% in the 2019 elections. Now, why does this happen? What are the backdrops? What are the causes for this kind of criminalization? So one is that the attraction of strongmen. Let's say there are people in a representative democracy. What we do? We get our leaders. We elect our leaders. Now, if the leader is not working, on the other hand, I see that there is no fear from this leader. The leader is ineffective. And as a member of parliament, as an MLA, this person is ineffective in solving my own problems. And simultaneously, what do I see? I see that if I go to the local boss or local gunda, that person is easily able to solve my problems. So over the period of time, what will happen? I will see this person, I will start eulogizing this person, and it might happen that this boss or local goon may become the next politician of India, right? A next representative. So over the period of time, what do we see? As human beings, we see that, let's say, the executive, whenever we are interacting with, let's say, the police force, whenever we are, let's say, interacting with the civil services, let's say the IAS officers, the PCS officers, if the state is not working, if there is ineffectiveness, on the other hand, if there is space of governance and someone, let's say a goon, is able to deliver on its promises. And how do these promises are met? So let's say there is a Janta Darbar that a local goon will hold. And whenever as a human being, as a local localite of that region, I go to that goon and I ask for anything, for any help, that person is helping me. And creating this Robin Hood effect. That means this person is extracting a lot of wealth, let's say through extortion, kidnapping from wealthy people like, let's say, doctors, local doctors, let's say contractors. On the other hand, the same person is helping us as poor people during, let's say, a local wedding. Let's say if someone is in agrarian distress. So what is this? This is essentially being a Robin Hood. And simultaneously the failure of state to deliver. And let us appreciate that in all places and in all geographies, in all spaces, the state cannot deliver equally due to multiple lacuna. One of those lacuna can be the lack of infrastructure development or lack of connectivity. And that we can take as an example in the regions where we are having left-wing extremism, where we are having more minerals, where we are having more forest. So such regions are less connected. And so there is naturally a lacuna on part of the state to deliver the basic goods and services. Then the idea of vote bank politics. Now, at the end of the day, to win an election, vote matters. And how do I garner my vote? So because of my inertias, because of the method that I have operated, I need a lot of people. People who can work for me, politically campaign for me. I need a lot of funds. Why? Because I need to distribute these funds to run my functions. Also, I need funds to maybe bribe people or give ordinary voters some amount of money in exchange for their votes. So I need people, I need funds, and maybe I need some amount of muscle. Why? To generate some amount of fear in my adversary. Now, if this format of election is being carried out, can we say that this is part of the inertia? This is the part of habit. This is the way elections are being conducted in, let's say, one constituency. Now, if this happens, who will garner more votes? A person who is standing without any support of money and muscle, or a person who is having money plus muscle? And usually, whenever we have muscle and money power, there is naturally involvement of a lot of criminals. And if the same people are then getting elected, then what happens? There is furthermore, the vicious cycle of criminalization is furthered. Then we have identities. We must appreciate that India is extremely diverse. And in this diversity, we have multiple identities. And even if I have to represent a particular identity, I have to represent a particular faith, a particular caste, even if I represent a particular caste, even if I represent a particular religion, but I also am having some criminal cases, it doesn't matter. Why? Because identities are stronger than ethics. So what will happen? The people will come to the people who are strongly associated with their identities. So again, identity becomes more important than the ethics. Identity becomes more important than my criminal antecedents. So what will happen? I tend to choose on the other side. I tend to ignore the criminalization. Then the lack of intra-party democracy. Now, if we are looking at any political party, so since independence, what we are seeing, that the political party is extremely large, and year after year, different political parties have ruled India. They have come and won election. But in these individual parties, either there is a family, or there is a group of intellectual, or there is a group of people who can generate more funds for the political party to fight elections. So either of these functions are being carried out by a group of individuals. We can say a coterie. So if we have a coterie in every political party, that simply means that internally we do not have democracy in our political parties itself. And the political parties are also insulated from transparency, accountability, and the Right to Information Act. Then, when we look at reward and punishment, so let's say I do a crime and I am punished. That is a very good punishment. But let's say I do some good work, but I am never appraised, I am never praised. Nobody comes and tells me that you're doing a good work. Then what happens? There is imbalance in reward and punishment. And let's bring this to Indian context. Let's say I commit a crime and I'm not punished. I am able to fight election after election. So what will happen? Low amount of conviction will again promote more such elements. Now, if I have criminals here who have money, muscle, and who are going scot-free, over the period of time, what will they do? They will grab more and more space. Why? Because of nexus. This nexus effect was highlighted by Vohra committee. The nexus between, let's say, bureaucrats, politicians, then businesses. And this nexus, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, is also one of the primary reasons for corruption and use of bad money in political funding. So the model is very simple, that today there will be a fund that will be given to a political party, and in return the political party will return this favor in form of, let's say, some tenders and some big projects. And then let's say the company donates 1000 crores to a political party. In return, this political party might give $3 billion worth of contracts, and this $3 billion money is not available with the company. So the government will also help in raising of loans from, let's say, public sector undertakings. So in turn, the investment that this company made in a political party, and usually a single company will make investments into multiple political parties to hedge their interest. And so this nexus effect continues. Then we are looking at election commission. So election commission time and again will have to use its plenary powers under Article 3 to 4 and lack of other powers to, let's say, dismiss or to close down political parties and to root out criminal elements. Today, what do we see? That the types of crime and the types of political crime and the sophistication is increasing over the period of time, not only in India but throughout the world. And the law and the election laws are not commensurate to fight with such. So law is way behind than the crimes today, the sophistication of crimes, and therefore there is a need of catch up to grant more power to election commission. Now, what are the impacts of this criminalization? A, it will erode public trust. Then it will erode the credibility of democratic system, and therefore we will look for national heroes. We will look for one solution to all problems. Rather than seeking local solutions, we will start looking for national solutions, which is not at all possible because our local issues, they will only be solved when we look at the local leadership. Then poor governance. Why so? Because let's say I have taken some amount of money to fund my election. So naturally I will have to give back. So now my private interests are becoming extremely important. A, I have to earn back that money which I have invested or I have spent or I have taken loan to fight the elections. B, I have to cater to the demands of all the funds that I took. So naturally, I will ignore the public interest and I will look at the personal interest. And that is also the definition of corruption. Whenever I am using my office, my public office for my personal interest. Then it cultivates the culture of impunity. Why? Because there is no respect for rule of law. Even if I evade the law, even if I am a criminal, even if there are 14 cases against me, but there is no conviction, there is delays in judicial system. Then it also encourages corruption. Now, one thing leads to another. Whenever we are talking about issues like political corruption, whenever we are talking about criminalization of politics, or we are talking about money laundering, or we are talking about organized crime, or we are looking at the lethargy or the red tapeism in bureaucracy. So all of these topics are linked. Why? Because this is the nexus which is created in accordance with the Bohra Committee. Then it is also about poor economics. Why? So I have created a system where there will be a lot of rich people. These rich people, part of the nexus, they have been created, they became rich through the nexus effect. So naturally, what kind of cars will they buy? So they will buy cars of 2 crores, 1 crore, let's say 50 lakhs. So multiple cars they will buy, right? Then there are other, which are the middle class, and then there is the poor class, right? So different levels of the society. So this is economic inequality for you. Parallelly, if I draw another picture of, let's say, the income distribution on space, which I call as disparity. Let's say disparity between the incomes of Assam versus Maharashtra, the per capita income. Or if we compare a rural area with a city region, then so NCR versus rural India or Bharat. So what do we see? There is an income inequality which is also visible in terms of space. Now, India would require cars which are economical. But the foreign companies will look at the demand of 50 lakh, 1 crore, 2 crore cars. And naturally, rather than setting up plants which cater to the demand, or let's say I have $100 to spend on India. Now I will spend 50 here, 50 here. Why? Because I will also cater to this demand. Now this demand is artificially created, which is also creating my inflation. Why? Because there is oversupply of money in fewer hands and there is undersupply of money with the rest. And this is also highlighted in the Oxfam report of wealth inequality. So this poor economics will then lead to creation of further disparity and further distortions in the production system of the entire country. Our choices will be changed. How? We will see more swanky cars, while lesser companies will be focusing on cost efficient or energy efficient cars. Then dragging the issues like poverty, hunger. Why? Because these are the political issues which will again cater them votes. So if I am taking care of poverty, hunger, providing all kinds of employment, then the basic premise of eulogizing or creating hero worship or becoming a Robin Hood, that is destroyed. So some part of preservation of poverty and hunger, it also aids the criminalization of politics. And if such issues of basic necessities are taken care of, then people are more empowered to take their decisions in terms of their voting rights. Now, let's look at some case laws and how various judgments have gone in terms of, they have opened the horizons of reforms in terms of politics. So, ADR versus Union of India, here the court held that every candidate has to declare his criminal, financial and educational records. Now, why do we need this? Because there is the right to information and I have the right to information to the criminal antecedents, to the financial antecedents, to what kind of loans, assets, liabilities my candidate is having. Then the biggest case which is a case law against criminalization of politics, is Lily Thomas versus Union of India. Here, if you are convicted for 2 or more years, then you will be immediately disqualified from your membership and you cannot fight elections. So this is the biggest case law when it comes to criminalization of politics. Then we have Public Interest Foundation versus Union of India. Here the court lamented that the political party has to publish the criminal records and antecedents of their candidates on their websites, social media handles and newspaper. Simultaneously, this publishing is also to be done in a manner that it is visible. It is not just for the publishing for sake, but it is for the people to view that. Let's say I publish all the criminal antecedents on a website, but that website has a different address or that website never loads. So, in turn, I have not published. So, it also directed the Election Commission of India to ensure that the information on candidates' criminal records were disseminated effectively and not merely disseminated. Now, what is the way forward? So, we are looking at the Dinesh Goswami committee, which talked about the state funding of elections, and we must look at the possibility of partial funding of elections. Then the Vora committee that talked about the nexus. Then we must look at fast tracking the justice delivery system so that the pendency in such cases is resolved. Then going for internal party democracy, which is essential if we want the political parties to be essentially democratic in their letter and spirit. Then the second ERC, it recommends that there must be amendment in Section 8 of Representation of People's Act, and we have discussed Section 8 deals with disqualification. So amend Section 8 of Representation of People Act to disqualify all persons facing charges related to grave and heinous offences and corruption where charges have been framed 6 months before elections. So if there is a charge sheet and there are grave and heinous crimes committed just before 6 months of election, then that person should not be allowed to fight elections. Then the ECI must also enforce the decisions of the court, and that is why there will be multiple petitions going to the Supreme Court asking for contempt proceedings. Why? Because the decisions of the Supreme Court are not properly executed. The second article relates to GS3, and this is regarding the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967. Why this is in the news? Because of some multiple raids that have been conducted on a news company. This news company is alleged to have links with China. So there was a New York Times article which said that a Chinese backed, so Chinese funded person has invested in NewsClick, and NewsClick would employ a lot of people. So their financial transactions were being tracked by the Enforcement Directorate, and this entire operation was to promote more Chinese oriented propaganda in Indian media. Now this is all alleged and it is to be proved in the court of law. Now we need to understand why do we need the UAPA Act itself. So first is an act against organized crime. We need to act against organized crimes, whether it is bootlegging, whether it is smuggling, whether it is our FICN, whether we are going for counterfeit currencies, we are involved in any kind of extortion, racketeering, all such crimes where I am operating with a sophisticated machinery like a corporate structure, but I am involved in crimes. Then the linkage of organized crime with terrorism. Why? Because if we have 10 goons who are easily hired by terrorists for, let's say, their logistic operations, then naturally this organized crime gangs, they become dangerous and they can be utilized by the terrorist, and so they also become dangerous. Then its linkage with white collars crimes. So let's say there is some amount of embezzlement of fund, or there is some amount of dirty money. So whenever I am involved in any crime, financial crime, sophisticated crime, where I am essentially embezzling money or I am going for money laundering operations, naturally what do we see? That the source of such funds usually come back to organized crime. Then using of complex corporate structure, that means creating a corporation in India, creating another subsidiary in, let's say, Singapore, then owning another set of subsidiaries in Mauritius, and then round tipping the same money back to India. Complex corporate structure using the corporate wheel. So I would do anything to not tell the government, whether in India or in Mauritius, that who is the actual owner, who is the actual beneficiary. Why? Because some part of the money is dirty money. And simultaneously, I do not want to pay taxes. I want to evade my taxes. Then I am in the era of internet and social media. Now, this also brings newer problems like cryptocurrency. And what do we see? We see that social media was directly used during the growth of ISIS. So Twitter, Facebook, all of was used to live stream, let's say killing videos also. Then indoctrination was being done and communication was done through Telegram. So what do we see? That in this time of social media, the organized crimes, their linkage with terrorism and the sophistication with which they use white collar crimes is increasing, and it has massified due to effects of internet and social media. Then we are looking at political canvassing. So a lot of these gangs will involve themselves in political canvassing and soft propagation of propaganda through fourth and fifth generation warfare or warfare, psychological warfare, and going for sophisticated attacks, which is rarely noticeable. And let's say I'm bringing funds from multiple sources and then I'm round tipping those funds all across the world to finally bring it to a company in India. And then let's say I am involved in fifth generation warfare, psychological warfare. I'm promoting the propaganda of the Chinese state, Chinese machinery. Then do I need a stringent law? Naturally. Then meddling in internal affairs of India. Let's say writing multiple opinion pieces that India should stay away from Tibet. India should think twice before joining Quad. So these are nothing but meddling in internal affairs to get your own ends right. So promoting Chinese interest through sophisticated articles in Indian media. Then let's look at the law itself. So this law is an alternate criminal law framework. So let's say the same person can be punished under the IPC, Indian Penal Code, or the person can be booked under UAPA. Why? Because this is a special statute. And naturally, the special statute will kick in when there is a special crime. Now, what is that crime? So let's understand. So general timelines or principles of criminal law that are not being followed. Why? By relaxing the timelines for state to file charge sheets. So now the state can investigate more and file the charge sheets at a later point of time. Then stringent conditions for bail. What do we see? We see that bail is the norm and jail is the exception. But when you commit such unlawful activities, bail is the exception. Then it gives the state more power compared to IPC. So whenever we are looking at the powers of the state or misuse of power of the state, what do we say? That there should be rule of law. And naturally, if the crime is of higher intensity, the punishment will also increase. And that is what we see, that India is not tolerating any forms of organized crime which has any amount of linkages with terrorism or which is harming India's internal interest or external interest. Then The UAPA 1967 was to prevent associations engaged in unlawful activities. Over the period of time, what is happening? That this unlawful activities, its ambit that has expanded a lot. So now it involves, let's say, individuals, groups, and the crimes that are associated, they have also increased, multiplied. Good example is inclusion of terrorism. Then the central government can declare any activity as unlawful, and there is severe punishment including death penalty and life imprisonment. There are multiple amendments also, and it is applicable to Indians as well as foreign nationals in India, in the territory of India, as well as externally. So if we are looking at recently, what do we see? We see that there is a lot of talk about Khalistan issue. So what do we see? That the NIA is investigating it. So NIA has got similar powers to investigate crimes not only in India but in the foreign soil and against Indians as well as foreign nationals. In 2004 amendment, it broadened the definition of unlawful activities to include terrorism, resulting in ban of 34 organizations. Very recently, what we have started designating individuals. So this is post 2019 amendment that we started designating individuals as terrorists. Then there is property attachment also, where the Director General of NIA has now the power to attach the property when there is any linkage with terrorism. And it also empowers NIA officers ranked as inspectors or above to investigate terrorism cases in addition to state level officers. Now what do we see? That with the inclusion of UAPA, amendment in UAPA and NIA Act, the central government now has extraordinary powers in terms of crimes which have any linkage with terror activities. Let's look at the third article, and this pertains to your GS3 Science and Technology. Now this is related to the Nobel Prize in Physics. Let's understand what is femtosecond and altosecond. So whenever we say femtosecond, it is 10 to the power minus 15 seconds. And whenever we say altoseconds, that is 10 to the power minus 18 seconds. Now, why did these people get the Nobel Prize? Is very simple. That let's say we were able to study the atom at 10 to the power minus 15 seconds. This is the time span till which this is the precision till which we were able to study the atom and its constituents, which is electron, proton, the nucleus. And now we are able to study it at 10 to the power 18. That is 1 altosecond. Let's understand. So an atom is a tiny unit of matter where the nucleus carries both the proton plus neutron, and then the electrons are mobile and they are outside the nucleus. Now the movement of the electrons, they are being extremely mobile, that is extremely fast. And if something is extremely fast, then what happens? Human vision is not able to foresee it, and therefore it blurs. It creates a blur effect, and we see it continuously. We are not able to capture the different frames. So for human senses, rapid movement blurs together and extremely short events are not possible to observe at all. That is why if we play a series of picture very fastly, then it looks like a video. Then these three scientists produced pulses of light that in altoseconds, which is 10 to the power minus 18 of a second. These short pulses of light thus produced can be used to measure rapid processes in which electrons move or change energy. That simply means that we are now able to observe the electrons, their movement, their energy transfer at a much precise level of altoseconds. Now, who all got the Nobel Prize? So, L. Huyer, then Pierre Agostini and Frank Krauss. All of them contributed to the working of alto second, observing the electron in alto second by producing pulses of light or flashes of light in these small intervals. Now let's understand what can be the implications, what can be the outcomes. So we are looking at very small timelines. So we can work this in the semiconductor industry, the electronic industry, then we can look at molecular levels. So it will be applicable to the chemical industry. Then if you are looking at pathogens, diseases, as well as drug creation. That means it will further create a host of applications in terms of research and development. And that is why it got the Nobel Prize in Physics. The fourth article pertains to a case study that came in the first page of Indian Express, and this pertains to your GS1 society as well as GS2 education. Now before we go ahead, we must understand how to use case studies. So usually in one part of any answer, we would jot down 5 points. 5 to 6 points we write. Now I can replace one of these points with a case study. And how would it look visually? So that I will draw. So let's say this is one side of my page script. So at the top, I have my subheading. Let's say I'm writing the first point, then explaining it. Second point, then explaining it. Let's say the third point, I want to use a case study. So here maybe I'll make a box, case study bead, and I'll write about it. Then 3, 4 and so on forward. Now, what is this case study about? So it is something that is being done in Bid in Maharashtra, and the credit goes to IS Deepa Mudhol Munde, and you can note down this name so that we can use this example also in ethics. So the idea was that Bid is part of Marathwada, and geographically looking, this is towards the east of Western Ghats. That means this is on the leeward side. That results in lack of rainfall, which results in water crisis and water scarcity, which then leads to massive out-migration and a trend to marry their children early. So more than 40% of the children of the women, they are married before 18. More than 40%, precisely around 43.7%. So that is the issue. Now, how to solve this? So IS Deepa Mudhol Munde, she took some initiative from local areas and got all the students of Bid to go for a pledge to not go for any child marriage. And this pledge is being done every Monday. So it is not simply about sensitization the children about child marriage, but it is also about taking it forward and making it part of their daily routine. And now what has happened? So approximately 5 lakh children are participating across 3,600 schools. And this has resulted in what? So in 2017, there were calls, in around 20 calls were made reporting for child marriage. So this year, 2023, more than 140 calls have been made to the authorities to prevent child marriage. So this is a success story. And what is the backdrop? The backdrop is the natural resource scarcity that the Marathwada region is suffering, which is forcing people to marry their children early, as well as forcing them to out-migrate to seek employment livelihood outside of their district. Manufacturing PMI slips to 5-month low, and this pertains to your GS3. Now let's look at what is PMI. Whenever we are going for a survey of, let's say, all the managers, the supply managers, whoever are going for inventory management in their own company. So through a survey, can I get the pulse of demand and naturally a pulse of the economic trend? So using such monthly market surveys from different companies across sectors, a purchasing managers index is created, and it tells us the direction of economic trends, what is the pulse of manufacturing as well as service sector. Now there are types of PMIs. So one can be manufacturing, the other can be services, and then we can have a combined PMI. And how do we calculate PMI? So the PMI is a number between 0 to 100. This indicator will tell us how the economic activity, manufacturing activity or the service activity is going on. So 0 to 100, and if it is 50, so it is neutral. If it is 50 plus, then there is increase or there is expansion. If it is, let's say, 49 and below, then there is contraction. Right? Now, let's say this month it was 51, next month it is 53. Then it is expansion when we look at the month on month. But if we look at this, then there is contraction. Or if we look at this 53 to 51, then it is contraction with respect to the previous one. But individually they are expansion in themselves. Now what is the importance? So it tells me how the economy is going, the manufacturing is doing, what will be the central bank's outlook in terms of inflation, demand, the action in terms of your monetary policy. So it tells me a lot of market data, possibilities. Then it also affects the equity market. If I get to know that the manufacturing activity is shrinking month on month and year on year, naturally it will affect not only the central bank but also the equity markets, the bond markets, the currency markets, as well as the companies who are the buyers as well as suppliers to plan their inventory ahead in the year. Thank you so much. I hope it helped.